So it is Black History Month, and I felt that it was important not to let the occasion pass without a conversation. I needed to talk to my friend, Terry Newby. I'm Amy Hallberg, author, editor, and writing mentor. And these are conversations with real-life creatives on how we find and embody our voices. Because if you want to be a real-life creative, it helps to know what that looks like for you. Welcome to Courageous Wordsmith.
So good to talk to you.
Oh, I am excited because we are talking about James Baldwin today.
Yes, I love talking about James Baldwin. He's been dead for some years now, and yet everyone is talking about him.
You know, it's interesting because it's one of those names I'm sure I always knew that name, but he is really, really having a resurgence. So can you tell us about who he is and where he came from and why are we seeing him so much right now?
Well, James Baldwin, as you know, is an African-American novelist. He died, I believe, in the early 2000s. He was prominent for a number of reasons. He's one of my favorite writers. One, because he spoke to the African-American experience in terms of both being the other. He grew up in segregated America, so he could speak, and he wrote about what it was like to be the other. Yet he also talked about a longing to be something else. So he knew what it was to be the other, but at the same time, he did not want to be defined by his race or his sexual orientation. James Baldwin was also openly gay at a time when that was not a politically expedient thing to do, even for writers. So he was an openly gay Black writer. He wrote Go Tell It on the Mountain, which is one of my favorite books. Another of his novels that I enjoy is called Another Country. And in these books, he talks about the depths of the Black American experience, but he was also very, very vocal about not wanting to be solely defined by his race or his sexual orientation. In fact, I listened to an interview that he did with Terry Gross a few years before he died, and he talked about how he did not belong to any organized groups. He wasn't necessarily a queer advocate or an African-American advocate. He wanted to be judged on the merit of his work, which is remarkable given that so much of his experience in his writing was based on him being both Black and queer. But when I read his books, it's just profound storytelling and mastery of the word.
Can we
Sure.
parse something
Sure.
here? Just a moment. Okay. So a lot of people are saying, people out there are saying that we don't need to pay attention to race because people are all the same. And yet I don't think that's what Baldwin was saying. I think what he was saying was he wanted it acknowledged that he was a Black man. He wanted it acknowledged that he was a gay man, that he was a human being, and he wanted to challenge systems that didn't support him. And at the same time, he wasn't asking for anything special except that he would like not to be erased and forced to live as somebody that
I
he
think
was
that is a
not.
wonderful way of putting it. I think you encapsulated it in that way. Of course, he wanted to be acknowledged as a Black man because that was his experience, and particularly growing up in the segregated South, as he did, growing up in the church. His race was a huge part of everywhere he went, even though he might not have wanted it to be that way. And I think in his life, he was very comfortable in not wanting to be judged solely by his race, but he was also a realist. And if he walked into certain neighborhoods, people were going to look at him and say, that is a Black man. If he went into certain churches or certain bookstores, or if he walked into a literary gathering, people were going to view him as a Black man right away, especially in the 60s. So I think when we talk about Baldwin and what he stood for, he not only was he didn't want to be judged by race or certainly his queerness, but he knew others would, and he simply wanted to be viewed on the merits of his work and the extent to which him being Black and queer, part of that's what he wanted to be judged on.
Well, then, so I have a question about that then. So how much do you think, because sometimes I'm going to sidetrack a little. Sometimes I feel that I see other people's experience more clearly because of ways that I have been othered. So how much does that queerness complicate how much Baldwin was willing to stand up as a black man, or how much was, as a black man, he willing to stand up for his queerness? Like, did they amplify each other? Did one take precedence? What
Oh
was going
boy,
on
that
for him
is
there, do
that
you
is a
think?
very complicated question.
I know, sorry.
Well, in the work that I've in the interviews that I've heard him, where he was interviewed in the books that I've read, his queerness was something that I wouldn't say he tried to suppress it, because if you've ever heard him interviewed or read some of his works, it was integral part of who he was and pretty irrepressible. But he was also a product of the church, and he grew up in the Southern Black church environment, and he was supposed to be a pastor. In fact, when I listened to the interview he did with Terry Gross, he talked about how he was a minister at 17, and he was, by all accounts, a very, very good
Oh,
minister.
wow.
And people would flock to hear his sermons. He was that good in terms of his command and knowledge of the Bible and his ability to deliver fiery sermons. But he was also gay, and I think that was pretty equally, readily apparent. And so he did not feel that he could square his love of religion and his love of the Bible and that experience that he had growing up with some of the teachings and what he experienced as a gay man. So there was eventually a time where the queerness and the religiosity collided. And when that happened, he felt he had no choice but to leave the church. So his religion did not become a big part of who he was.
I just think it's hilarious as you're talking, like the
Yes,
dogs
yes,
barking. Like,
they're barking at something. I don't know what it is.
but like it's almost like when you talk about that, like a gay man giving sermons in the church, it's almost like, the dogs are going to come after you. I mean, like there's almost this
Yes.
primal fear attached to that. Like when you believe in something so fully and yet you understand, I believe in this, and yet it needs to evolve in order for me to truly, fully
Yes.
believe in it, which, I mean, like, I think sometimes we know that we want something better, but we can't even envision what that better thing is. But we do understand I am both loyal to this cause and
Right.
it needs to do better. It
Right.
needs
And
to.
I think in Baldwin's case, he realized that the church and religion was only going to go so far when it came to queerness. He was only going to be recognized to a certain point. He was a brilliant orator. He knew the Bible. He was steeped in the culture. But if he had openly embraced being a gay man in the church, that would have been the end of any religious career. And he knew that. And so it was easier for him to embrace that as a writer than it would have been as a minister. And I think, everyone has to make that choice in some level, right? If you're born Catholic, and I'm not Catholic, I'm using this as an example, do you embrace everything that the Catholic Church stands for, even though there are some things maybe you don't agree with? Do you, grin and bear it? Do you live with the bad stuff? Or do you say, no, you have to do better, and I can't be part of this organization that holds these beliefs?
Can we talk about America then? Because he was
Yes,
very much an American. He was very critical. Some might say he did not love America. Maybe he loved it so much that he wanted it to do better. What do you think?
I think he loved the promise of America. I think he loved the fact that on paper, America was the country where he was going to be considered as an equal, which is true. Now, in his time, he certainly was not considered as an equal, both because of his race and because of his sexual orientation. He was critical of America, but I think he was critical of America perhaps more pointedly so, but in the same sense that Martin Luther King was critical of America. Basically, if you love this country, you hold its feet to the fire. And I think that was James Baldwin's viewpoint, although he might have been a bit more critical of the American experience because of what he experienced as both a black man and a gay man.
It seems to me what's running through my head right now is actually Janis Joplin. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. And I feel like sometimes it's like, well, why wasn't he just quiet then? Why didn't he hide? Why was he so vocal about it? And maybe it's because he understood that there was no safety for him in a closet.
That is a wonderful take. And so when I listen to the interviews with him and read his works, part of me does so as an outsider because I know what it's like to be a black writer. I do not know what it's like to be a queer writer or a gay person in America. I don't have that experience. And so when he talked about the challenge and struggle that he faced with being a religious person, I got part of it. The other part, I was, like you said, viewing it as an outsider. So I think as a writer, as someone as prodigiously gifted as he was, he felt he had no choice but to say something. I mean, I can't let this gift just sort of sit there and be quiet while all these bad things are happening around me. And if I have the ability to tell this story and actually, you know, get paid for it and educate people, that's my job. He was willing to die on that hill.
When some might actually say, this is me, I just turned 55
Congrats.
yesterday,
Happy
Terry.
birthday.
Thank you. At this stage in life, I've burned through a few past lives and or stages of life, and I've come to the conclusion that there are things I went through that they quote didn't work out, but actually they were essential for preparing me to
Mhm.
be here now. And so when you look at Baldwin, like he could not have been the artist that he was. And one could argue there are many fine ministers, but he served the country,
Mhm.
humanity, people, the imagination, the collective spirit better by taking those foundations
Yeah,
as a minister and moving beyond and turning it into art. You and I talked about this. Art is not
that is
a
right.
luxury. It's not something that we can just do without. It's actually really important to humanity. So, do you have any
Oh
thoughts on that?
boy, you and I could talk for hours on this topic. But when you think about
Uh-huh.
the role of the arts historically in this country, worldwide, and now how that is come under attack, to say that art is not a luxury, it's almost stronger than that. It's almost like it's a necessity, right? I mean, the way
Mhm,
that we tell stories that appeal to everyone is not necessarily by telling the truth. It is by creating a fiction, whether it's the
mm,
form of a novel or a play or a wonderful painting or a piece of artwork or a memoir. The way we tell these
mhm,
truths that educate, you almost have to do it in sort of a backdoor way, right? To tell people
mm.
that there's a history of racism in this country and it needs to be addressed. You can say that to people, and they'll hear it, and some will be moved and some won't. But if you can do it in the form of a novel or a wonderful portrait or a play, or if you can actually tell a story that will appeal to everyone, those who might not otherwise be receptive to your message will start to pay attention. That's the beauty of art.
I can extrapolate. I have all these ways in which I have been othered, but I have many ways in
Right.
which I am not
Right.
othered, but I can read somebody's writing. I can see somebody's story. I can look at their art and I can see something for me in the words of
Right.
James Baldwin.
That
Isn't that
that that is
amazing?
exactly why art is beautiful. That you, as a white woman, can read the work of a gay black man and think, "Hey, I get that. That relates to me." That's what art does.
I mean, that's the point, right? Like you need,
Mhm.
humanity's hard. Life is hard. We could just lose all of our hope, not know what to do. The art gives us something so that we can have faith in something more, so that we can really connect to each other in a loving way. Like you said,
Mhm.
I'm not black. If people were looking at us right now, I am like the whitest white lady. It's the middle
Mhm.
of winter in Minnesota. I'm so white, but I can understand and I can have compassion and I can say, actually, I want to be reading works by black
Mhm.
authors because there is an experience that I didn't have that I need to understand to have a full range of human understanding.
Right. Right. And oh, that is just such a powerful topic because if when done well, the best art when you're reading it makes you think that you identify with these people, you understand them, that maybe you could even like them, or even maybe you don't like them, but you understand what motivates them, and they don't have to be anything like you, right? They don't have to be the same race,
Mhm.
the same gender. The best art makes you identify with these people and makes you figure out why they're struggling, or at least identify with their struggle. It's beautiful. Yes.
So, you mentioned some titles that you loved, and I would love it if you would pick one of those and just unpack what is it about and why do you
Are
love
you
it
referring
so
just to the James
much?
Baldwin titles? Okay. I
Yep.
loved Another Country because it was one of the first Baldwin books that I read. It's not his most famous work. I think Go Tell It on the Mountain is probably his more famous work, but Another Country is the first of his books that I read. I think a friend let me borrow it, and I'm ashamed to say I never gave it back. It's a powerful book. It talks about not Baldwin's experience, but the fictional narrator's experience of being black and queer in an urban environment and the things that he has to do. And one of the things that I liked about it is that the narrator has a white friend, and the white's friend's name is, it's one of the best literary names ever. His name is Vivaldo More. And I think he's Italian. And Baldwin describes him as being tall and lanky with a face like a horse, which, so I just, yeah,
That's awesome.
I imagine this very tall, lanky, brown haired Italian guy named Vivaldo. I mean, I've probably seen people who looked at that, but the book is just gritty. It is really gritty. And it talks about, drunkenness and homelessness and the things that people in difficult urban environments do. But yet it's also beautiful and poetic in the way it describes the friendship between the narrator and this Vivaldo More. So it's gritty and difficult to read, but there's just some beautiful moments of friendship between these two men.
So is the beauty of it that it creates an understanding of humanity in a situation that we might otherwise be called to
I
just
think that's part of it.
dismiss?
It's easy to look at some of these characters and the things they have to do and the squalor in which they live, and say, well, these are just bad people. These are broken people. This is a function of not where they live, but who they are. And then you balance that with the tenderness and the affection and the language that the two men use, that Vivaldo and the narrator use when they are discussing and getting through life together. And it is a wonderful juxtaposition between the grit and the squalor and just a beautiful friendship.
It also occurs to me that if we can see common humanity in people in
Mhm.
squalid places, then we have to acknowledge that we are in some way like them, and that perhaps, I mean, this is why art is dangerous, and you and I have talked about this. If art was not dangerous, people would not spend so much
Exactly.
energy denigrating
Exactly.
it. You realize that if somebody is in a squalid situation, perhaps it is not purely their fault, but the circumstances into which they were born. And if that is the case, then all of us could be susceptible to the same
Yes.
thing. But I think that there's something really dangerous and subversive about art that gives us any kind of compassion for people who are down on their luck. Because if that's so, then how do we continue to not
Mhm.
help them?
How do we, right, how do we continue to not help them? How do we, I think to do that, to continue to not help them, you have to ignore the fact that these things could happen to you. You have to have a certain, maybe not
Mhm.
superiority, but an aloofness that borders on cruelty.
I
Right.
think it scares people. It really scares people. It is Black History Month, and I'm gonna say, I think that sometimes the unwillingness to look at that is that so basically by arbitrary conditions of birth, of being born white, that's an
It
accident of
is.
birth. And if so, then, um, I've been taking a lot of courage, Terry, from what Black people are saying in their art, in their writing, because these are people who have survived and they're really good at thinking beyond what is immediately apparent and laying out
Yes.
something bigger. And I think that we need to have a bigger sense of imagination.
The more desperate and dangerous the times, the bigger the imagination needs to be. And I think that's for all of us as writers. I mean, it's artists, whether you're a playwright or a novelist, as I am, or a memoirist. I mean, the responsibility gets bigger once you realize how important what we do is, and also how many people are so willing to just demonize an other. And the only way to fight that is through stories, which is the only way we've really ever had to fight that, is through stories, because they allow us to share our humanity together.
Okay, so given that James Baldwin did not want to be a token, did not want to be a figurehead, the man had quite a lot
Yes.
of depth. Besides being a Black man, besides being a gay man, who was he to you? If you could describe him, his personality, what did he bring to the world other than those obvious
He was a very
characteristics?
prickly, opinionated, brilliant wordsmith. He was an astute observer of the human condition. He could string words together. I mean, all of us as writers think we're pretty good at, penning the beautiful phrase, but he penned the beautiful phrase in a way where you not only admired the phrase, but you admired the depth behind it. It wasn't just pretty sentences. It was beautiful, pretty sentences with a lot of depth where you realize, wow, that person is in a lot of pain right now. So if I had to sum him up, for me, he was a prickly iconoclast who did not want to be judged based on anything except his work. And, his work stands on its own, even many years after his death.
So you, as a playwright, as a novelist, when you're thinking about then who are you because of having read the works of James Baldwin, because of having known him from afar, but clearly having a very intimate knowledge of him as a person?
In terms of a writer, it's made me realize that you have to tell big stories. Baldwin's stories were obviously infused from his own life, but they were not about him. I mean, he talked about lots of other people. His depictions of, again, the Vivaldo Moore character were brilliant. And so what I admire about him is that although it would have been easy for him to simply write through a two-dimensional lens, through the lens of a gay man or a black man, he chose not to do that. He was a much bigger writer than that. And he told stories that arguably, I guess, were not his to tell, but he made them his to tell. And I've admired that, and I try to do that. I don't view myself solely as a black writer, although I am, and that's infused my experience in some of the things that I've written about. But I try to tell much bigger stories than just that, because otherwise you're self-limiting if you only tell minor stories, and you've got to have the ability to tell the stories of others.
And I would say too, I mean, so as he was a minister, he came up and that ministry actually informed
Yes,
him as a writer. Of course, I've made no secret of the fact that who I was as a teacher informs what I do now
right.
as a writer. You're a
Yes,
lawyer, right? You bring that forward. You may not write stories about lawyers. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I think, you said something about, well, you write it as fiction or whatever. You and I have talked a lot about memoir because
no,
that
it's
is
not.
not your genre.
It's yours.
It's
Yes,
mine. But I think whether you're writing nonfiction or fiction, there is energetic truth, which is different than facts, right?
yes,
Or certainty. It's feeling a sense of something, a dynamic that they capture, and you see it and you're like, oh, that. And it just, you see it and it's almost like this mirror and
right,
you recognize
right.
it,
The dynamic, the authenticity. I think you raise such a good point there, because facts by themselves are wonderful, and we should all adhere to be factual. I mean, facts are wonderful things, but to tell a good story, whether it's any form of art, novels obviously rely on fiction, plays rely on some fiction. Even what you do, memoirs, the creative nonfiction, there's an art in how you frame it, and who you name and who you don't, who you leave in, who you leave out. There's an art to that. And I think that art, which doesn't involve facts, is critical to actually telling the story that's most powerful and most profound. So facts are good, but just facts by themselves, that's a history book. And a lot of people aren't necessarily moved by that as much as they would be by an entertaining story.
I mean, true fact, I took one history class in college and I tried to analyze the history like a literature person would. And my professor did not enjoy me much. And yet that history of that time, it's everything that
Yeah.
I still work with today. It's just, I'm sorry, but I'm going to come to it from the lens of a literature major. And that's where I find, Terry, I just really feel strongly like, how do we find love for each other? We find it by seeing each other as
Yes.
human. What we really need, I'm hearing this everywhere. What we really need right now is love for each other, joy, connection, really understanding how much we
Yes.
have in common for humanity. That
Yes.
is our path
I
forward.
think that that's true right now, because it's so easy to fall victim to hateful and divisive rhetoric because it satisfies a dopamine hit in you. But love is much harder. Love requires work. Being hateful doesn't require that much work. In fact, I would argue it's probably just a natural instinct. Being the opposite of hateful, showing love for each other, that requires work. And that requires a constant and everyday commitment. Not unlike the commitment that being a writer is. You've got to commit to the craft every day, just like you commit to the memoir. And I think showing love for each other through our art, it's a lot of work.
I'm going to say one more thing, though, to that, Terry.
Yes.
It builds. We look at the writers who have encouraged us. We have our own work and we look at it and say, well, at the end of the day, that's what I did on that one. And we move on to the next topic. But we know that it's
Right.
something we can do. We're not helpless. We look at a blank page and we know, wow, that page looks really, really blank.
I
I
don't
don't
know
know
what
what
I'm
I'm
going
going
to
to
put
do
on
with
there.
it.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So that is the work, right? But then we do know
Mhm.
how to show up in little bits and bytes. We know how to show up. And I think that people like James Baldwin show us not only how to do that, but that it's
I think you're
really
right. I think you're right.
important.
Because it would have been very easy for him to retreat into hate and divisiveness given all of the terrible things that he faced. But he wrote from a position of love. He loved the characters that he wrote. He loved the world that he created for himself, and he had to create it for himself. And so I think he, along with some of my other favorite writers like Toni Morrison, have shown us what the power of love in literature, when combined, what that can mean and how much good that can do.
So I'm going to ask you a favor. And when people listen to this podcast, I'm going to put this in the show notes. Would you please be willing to, in honor of Black History Month, just give me a little list of like 3, 4, 5 books that are your favorite works by Black authors that people might want to read
Okay.
right now?
I'm going to name the ones that I guess have had the most impact on me as a writer. So first, Another Country, James Baldwin, The Bluest Eye, Toni Morrison, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, Richard Wright's Native Son, and then we go with another Toni Morrison just because she's kind of my touchstone would be Beloved. How many is that? Is that 4? Is that 5?
That was 5. Well, thank you so much, Terry. And I really appreciate this conversation.
It's always a treat. And you know what? Usually a bit of a mystery. I like it. It's good.
It's going to be good. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks for listening to Courageous Wordsmith. Today's episode featured Terry Newby. You can read more about him and check out his links in the show notes. That's where you'll find my links too. Backstage at Courageous Wordsmith, our production team is the brilliant Brooke Roy and me, Amy Hallberg. You can subscribe to this podcast right on this page. Sign up for my emails and share with friends who want to write. And how about you? You have stories to tell. What if you let yourself tell them? What would that look like for you? I am Amy Hallberg, and until we meet again, travel safely.